Margaret wore reading glasses, kept her hair in a simple bun, and always had a book in her hand. For 3 years, she'd been the head librarian at the downtown branch, organizing events, helping with homework, settling disputes over overdue fees. No one ever asked about the small scar above her left eyebrow or why she always positioned herself with a clear view of all exits. They were about to find out. Welcome to the human stories. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden strength and unexpected courage, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. The Central Library on 5th Street was the kind of place that made headlines. 3 floors of books, a computer lab that smelled like old coffee, and reading rooms where college students pretended to study while scrolling through their phones. Margaret Chen had been the head librarian there for exactly 3 years, arriving every morning at 7:30 a.m., 30 minutes before opening. Always the same routine: unlock the doors, disable the alarm, turn on the lights, floor by floor, check the overnight book drop. The other staff members, Janet, who ran the children's section, and David, who managed the computer lab, usually arrived just before 8 a.m., rushing in with their coffee cups and morning complaints about traffic. Margaret never rushed. She moved through the library like she owned it, which in a way she did. The patrons loved her. She was patient with the elderly Korean man who read hometown newspapers every Tuesday, always asking about his grandchildren. She was gentle with teenagers, using the library as a hangout spot, never making them feel unwelcome as long as they kept their voices down. She was thorough with college students needing research, help sometimes spending hours helping them find exactly the right source. But there were things about Margaret that no one knew. No one knew she could identify firearms by sound alone, or that she'd spent countless hours memorizing the acoustic signatures of different weapons. No one knew she'd mentally mapped every entrance, exit, and structural weak point in the building, or that she'd calculated sight lines and choke points out of pure habit. No one knew her reading glasses were plain glass, a prop she'd adopted to appear more scholarly, or that her vision was sharp enough to spot threats across 3 floors of stacks. And no one knew that Staff Sergeant Margaret Chen, formerly of the 75th Ranger Regiment, had spent 8 years in places where libraries were luxuries, and silence meant the difference between life and death. The scar above her left eyebrow was from Kabul. 2019, shrapnel from an IED that took out half her convoy while they were returning from a reconnaissance mission. She had been the only one to walk away from that explosion carrying 2 wounded soldiers to safety, while blood ran down her face and enemy fire erupted around them. The medal they'd given her for that day, a silver star, was locked away in a safe deposit box with 3 others she'd never mentioned to anyone. Margaret had retired at 28, not because she was tired of fighting, but because she was tired of what fighting had made her. Shed wanted normal. Shed wanted quiet. Shed wanted to be around books and students and people who argued about late fees instead of life and death. Shed wanted to wake up without checking for threats, to sleep without keeping one ear open for danger. For 3 years, she'd gotten exactly what she wanted. Shed built a life around predictability, safety, and the gentle rhythm of library work. Shed convinced herself that Staff Sergeant Chen was someone she used to be, not someone she still was. Until Tuesday afternoon at 2:47 p.m., the children's reading group had just finished their weekly session. 6 kids between the ages of 5 and 8, along with their parents, were scattered around the small amphitheater area on the library's 2nd floor. Margaret was helping Janet clean up the picture books, listening to the comfortable chatter of families preparing to leave when she heard it, a sound that shouldn't have been there. The main doors opening with too much force, the metal frames vibrating with the impact. Footsteps, too heavy, too quick, too purposeful. Voices, too loud for a library, too tense for anything. Good speaking and clipped, urgent tones that made Margaret's blood run cold. Margaret's hand stopped halfway to the bookshelf. Every instinct she'd spent 3 years suppressing, every survival mechanism she'd tried to bury under civilian routines, came flooding back like a dam burst. She turned her head slightly, not enough to look obvious, but enough to see the main floor through the glass panel that separated the children's area from the rest of the library. 3 men, black tactical clothing, not casual black but military-grade gear, moving with purpose, not browsing, not lost, not confused. One of them was speaking into a radio using hand signals between transmissions. Another was scanning the room in a methodical pattern that Margaret recognized immediately, the same systematic sweep pattern she'd used hundreds of times in building clearances across 3 combat deployments. These weren't patrons. These weren't confused tourists or lost students. They were operators, professionals, and they were here for a specific reason. Margaret's heart rate didn't spike. Her breathing didn't change. Her hands didn't shake. 3 years of civilian life hadn't erased 8 years of military training. It had only covered it with a thin veneer of normalcy. Her mind shifted into the cold, calculating state where fear becomes fuel and chaos becomes manageable data to be processed and acted upon. She counted 3, visible, likely more positioned outside. Armed, definitely the bulges under their jackets were unmistakable. Organized, absolutely, their movements were too coordinated to be amateur. The question wasn't whether this was a threat. The question was what kind of threat it was and how much time she had before it escalated. The answer came 30 seconds later when the first gunshot shattered the afternoon quiet like a thunderclap. The sound of gunfire in an enclosed space is unmistakable. It's not like the movies. It's sharper, more violent, and it echoes in ways that make your ears ring and your heart pound. The shot came from the main floor, followed immediately by screaming, the primal sound of people who'd suddenly realized they were in mortal danger. Margaret didn't freeze. She didn't panic. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she dropped to one knee behind the children's bookshelf and began giving orders in a voice that was quiet, but carried the absolute authority of someone who'd commanded soldiers in combat. Janet, get the children and parents to the back corner behind the reference desk. Stay low, stay quiet, cover their mouths if they try to scream. If anyone asks, you don't know where I am. Janet, who had been frozen in place with a picture book in her hands, stared at her with wide eyes. Margaret, what's happening? What do it now? Margaret's voice cut through the panic like a blade. David, where are you? How many patrons are in the building? David's voice came from the computer lab, shaky but clear. I'm here. There are men with guns downstairs. Maybe 15 people, 20. Margaret was already moving, no longer walking as a civilian, but moving as a soldier. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out something no one knew she kept there. A tactical knife military issue still sharp after 3 years. She dialed 911. This is Margaret Chen at the Central Library on 5th Street. Multiple armed intruders. Shots fired. I need immediate response. Through the glass panel, she could see them clearly now. 3 men with automatic weapons, tactical gear herding patrons toward the center of the main floor. This was random violence. This was coordinated, planned, executed by professionals. Margaret had seen this before. In Afghanistan, Iraq training scenarios, she'd never imagined she'd see it in her library. But all those years of training, all those scenarios that had seemed so far from her quiet civilian life, they were suddenly the most relevant things in the world. Margaret moved through the library like a ghost. 3 years of knowing every corner gave her advantages the intruders didn't have. From the biography section, she could see the main floor clearly. 18 patrons sat in the center hands, visible terror on their faces. The leader spoke into his radio, checking in, waiting for something. This was the endgame. This was preparation. Margaret's phone buzzed. This is Lieutenant Colonel Stevens, Tactical Operations. I understand you have military experience. Staff Sergeant Margaret Chen, 75th Ranger Regiment, retired. 8 years active, 3 deployments. I'm inside with clear sightlines to the hostile position. Sergeant Chen, I need you to find a secure location and wait. Sir, I'm your team right now. 18 civilians, 3 armed hostiles. They're organized, equipped, waiting for something I can provide, intel and tactical support. Civilian protocols don't, sir. This stopped being civilian when they brought automatic weapons into my library. I know this building better than anyone. Use me. A pause, What do you need? Timeline. Are they making demands? How long until tactical response? No demands, no communication. Tactical team is 15 minutes out. 15 minutes is too long. These aren't amateurs, they're here to make a statement. Margaret was moving as she spoke. Through the window, she saw something that changed everything. One gunman was setting down a heavy backpack near the hostages, working with visible wires. Sir, they have explosives. This is a hostage situation. It's a bombing. 8 minutes out. Can you maintain observation? Margaret watched the bomber work methodically, professionally. Someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Sir is setting up what looks like a timed device. 8 minutes might be too long. Do not engage. You are a civilian. I have 18 innocent people about to die in my library. I have 8 years of training that says I can stop it, and I have a responsibility that doesn't end because I changed careers. She was already moving. The approach would be tricky. Cross open ground, neutralize the bomber, deal with 2 other gunmen. Split second timing, absolute commitment. Am going to attempt neutralization. If I fail, the device is center main floor. If I succeed, it'll hold position until your team arrives. Sergeant Chen. Margaret ended the call. She'd been staff. Sergeant Chen for 8 years, Margaret the librarian for 3. Right now, 18 people needed the sergeant. She took a deep breath, checked her grip on the tactical knife, and began her approach. Margaret moved like water between the stacks, using every piece of cover. The bomber was 30 feet away, completely focused on his work. His weapon was slung accessible, but not ready. He was confident, unaware. 20 feet. She could hear him connecting wires, arming components, military grade, explosive timer mechanism designed for maximum casualties, 10 feet. The bomber glanced around. His eyes passed right over her position. She was invisible. Another shadow among the stacks. 5 feet. Margaret didn't wait. She moved like lightning, covering the distance in a bound. The tactical knife went into the bomber's neck, severing the carotid artery. He dropped instantly, hands going to his throat, eyes wide with shock. Margaret caught his body, lowering it silently. She grabbed his automatic weapon, checked the chamber, and turned toward the other gunmen. They were already turning, alerted by instinct. Margaret had maybe 3 seconds. She used 2. The first gunman never had a chance. Margaret's burst caught him, center mass dropping him before he could raise his weapon. The sound was deafening, but she was already moving, using the circulation desk for cover. The third gunman was smarter. He'd taken cover behind a pillar, returning fire. The hostages were screaming, trying to crawl away. Margaret's mind raced. One hostile remaining, good position, clear sight lines. She needed to flank him, but that meant crossing open ground under fire. Unless Margaret smiled grimly. She'd been working here for 3 years. She knew things about this building no one else did, including the fact that the old dumbwaiter system still worked. Margaret Lowe crawled to the service elevator, barely large enough for a person but functional. It would put her directly behind the gunman's position. She squeezed in weapon across her chest and activated the manual pulley. The old mechanism was quiet, well-maintained, invisible to someone who didn't know it existed. 30 seconds to the basement. Margaret used the time to check her weapon control, her breathing plan, her next move. Come up behind him, neutralize the threat, secure the hostages. The dumbwaiter opened into basement storage. Margaret slipped out, found the service stairs, began her ascent. She could hear sporadic gunfire above the gunmen, firing at a position she'd already left. Margaret reached the main floor through the service entrance behind the periodical section. The gunman was exactly where she'd expected, focused on the circulation desk, completely unaware. She didn't give him a chance to surrender. These were terrorists who'd brought explosives into a library full of innocents. They'd made their choice. Margaret's final burst was precise, professional, fatal. The gunman dropped without another shot. The library fell silent except for crying and heavy breathing. Margaret stood slowly, weapon ready, scanning for additional threats. When satisfied the building was secure, she called out calmly, "This is Margaret Chen. The threat has been neutralized. Everyone stay down until police arrive. You're safe now." The tactical team arrived 4 minutes later to find Margaret sitting at the circulation desk. her weapon disassembled and laid out, hands visible and empty. The hostages were grouped together, shaken but unharmed. 3 gunmen were dead, weapons secured, explosive device safe. Lieutenant Colonel Stevens was first through. The FBI investigation would reveal the 3 gunmen were part of a larger terrorist cell. The library attack meant to open a coordinated bombing campaign. Margaret's intervention had not only saved 18 lives, it had prevented a massacre. But that would come later. Right now, Margaret was helping Janet comfort the children, assisting David with adult hostages, making sure everyone was okay. She was the librarian again, quiet and helpful, except for the crowd of tactical officers and FBI agents who couldn't stop staring at her. Word spread quickly, the quiet librarian who'd single-handedly stopped a terrorist attack. One FBI agent approached her, "Mom, I'm Agent Martinez. I wanted to thank you. That was incredible." Margaret looked up from the children's book she was organizing. "Just doing my job." "Your job is being a librarian." Margaret smiled slightly. "My job is protecting the people in this building, has been for 3 years." The library reopened 2 weeks later. Main floor cleaned, repaired, restored to its quiet state. Bullet holes, patched, blood cleaned up, children's section exactly as before. Margaret returned to her routine, 7:30 a.m. arrival, unlock doors, disable alarm check, book drop. Janet and David returned shaken, but determined. Patrons returned slowly, then in larger numbers, but things were different. Margaret was different. She still wore reading glasses and kept her hair in a bun, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Staff treated her with different respect, patrons looked at her with awe and gratitude, and Margaret went back to organizing books, helping with homework, settling overdue fee disputes, back to being quiet, helpful, unassuming. But she also went back to positioning herself with clear views of exits, mentally mapping the building, counting potential threats, back to being ready. Because Margaret Chen had learned something important. You can take the soldier out of the war, but you can't take the war out of the soldier. And sometimes, when innocent people are in danger, that's exactly what the world needs. 3 months later, a small plaque appeared near the main entrance. In memory of the courage shown here, and in honor of those who serve in silence. Margaret never said anything about the plaque. She simply walked past it every morning, gave it a small nod, and continued with her day. Just a quiet librarian doing her job, protecting the people in her. 6 months later, Margaret received a package with no return address. Inside was a military challenge coin, black with silver lettering. One side showed the Ranger tab. The other side had a single word: always. She kept the coin in her desk drawer next to her reading glasses and library stamp. Sometimes when the library was quiet and she was alone, she'd take it out and hold it, remembering who she used to be, who she'd always been, and who she'd be again. If the world ever needed her, the library stayed quiet. The patrons felt safe. The children kept coming to story time, and Margaret Chen, head librarian, kept watch over them all, just like she always had, just like she always would. So now I ask you, have you ever met someone who seemed ordinary, quiet, unassuming, only to discover they were hiding strength? You could never imagine someone who'd walked away from one life to build another, but never really left their training behind. Share their story in the comments. Tell us what city you're watching from. And if you think stories like this need to be told, hit that subscribe button and help us honor the quiet heroes who stand watch in places we'd never expect. Because at the Human Stories, we believe that heroism doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears reading glasses and organizes books by day, but it's always ready when the world needs it most. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.